Good afternoon, everyone. If you please take your seats, we have a lot of exciting material to cover in the next hour, so we'd like to begin. My name is James Fallows. I'm a writer for The Atlantic. I'm delighted to be here at the Ideas Festival again. We have a really interesting panel on an important topic. Of course, one of the subjects for this Ideas Festival is the change in television as a business, as a social influence with the technological and other transformations going on. And our particular topic today is going to be the future of TV news, with all the different pressures working upon it and making it so different from the days of Huntley and Brinkley and Walter Cronkite and even Tom Brokaw. What is going to be the role for that? And we have a great panel to discuss it. You know all four of these people. I'll just introduce them briefly and then we'll start the conversation. Down at the far end, my left, your right, is Sreenivasan. You all know from the PBS NewsHour. He's worked for CBS and ABC. You're the host of the Aspen Ideas channel, I believe. Is that right? So you have special standing here. We have Robert Barnett, king of the Washington lawyers. He's of particular fascination to me. I've written about presidential debates over the years. He's been the main expert preparer, including for the first presidential debate this year. We'll talk about that.
And the second and third.
And the second and third, in fairness, must be said. We have Ehab al-Shihabi of Al Jazeera, who's in charge of the new Al Jazeera America program that's going to launch at an undisclosed date, but you might disclose it. In fact, you mentioned it last night.
Late August. I would say late August.
Yes, and so you heard his presentation last night at the opening ceremony about what he thought a new mission for Al Jazeera America might be. We'll hear more about that. And then, of course, you know Lawrence O'Donnell. He's familiar to all viewers of MSNBC as for his the show he does every evening, which we'll be doing tonight from Aspen. Familiar to and beloved around the world as the writer for The West Wing and creator of the West Wing.
Not creator.
Creator, okay.
Hired hand.
Hired hand, a significant influence in the West Wing, and known for political service before that with Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Senate Finance Committee, and all the rest. So I'm going to open, I have a anecdotal lead, which I'm going to use to cue up a comment from Bob Barnett. So how many of you followed the Wendy Davis filibuster 2 nights ago in Texas? How many of you followed that on TV? Anybody holding up a hand is lying because it wasn't on TV. It was to the best of my knowledge, and you can contradict, there may be something I didn't catch, but I believe this was a Twitter-only phenomenon, where you had this state senator from Fort Worth, I believe, a Democratic woman, a very dynamic woman, who decided to run out the clock against a very tough anti-abortion bill in the Texas State Senate. The legislator had to adjourn at midnight, and she kept the floor for 11 plus hours, and the audience on Twitter grew like this. But to the best of my knowledge, not CNN, not MSNBC, not Fox, not any other TV network carried this news. You could think of this as the first genuine news event that happened outside the ken of TV. So the question is, what does this betoken for TV news? Is this a sign of how there's going to be just of ways in which it has to adapt, of things it's not able to do, things it'll have to do better, et cetera? I turn to you, Robert Barnett, to give us our talking points, a debater's brief, if you would, on why you think that there are challenges for TV news. Then we'll hear from our other panelists how they're going to respond to them.
Let me start by saying thank you all for being here. I have no standing to be on this panel.
Just a country boy.
My only qualifications are I'm married to one, Rita Braver of CBS News, and I've got about 350 clients in this business, correspondents, producers, executives, etc. And so it's given me the opportunity to not be a participant in it, but to observe it from close range. I want to ask a question following up on Jim. How many of you 3 or more times a week watch a network evening news broadcast? How many of you primarily get your news from the internet? I rest my case. No. I think the biggest challenge to TV news is the alternative ways to receive news. The internet obviously being one, the comedy news shows being another. So many young people get their news now by seeing what they're making fun of. And that's an interesting way to get your news. There is a generational divide. We saw it a little bit in the raising of hands there. I think
now.
I think that the evening news shows, the traditional evening news shows, face great challenges. Again, evidenced by the raising of hands. I think that the demise or modification of the magazine shows, as evidenced most recently by the closing of Rock Center, is another indication of the challenges that TV news faces. The morning show wars, the proliferation of morning shows, the diversification of morning shows, which is where the money is another challenge that's faced. I'm optimistic, though, because I think while broadcast media and broadcast news tends to shrink, cable news, as evidenced by Ehab and some other things that we're talking about today, I'm sure, will give us more choices and more opportunities to hear views and to hear the news. And I think what Ehab's doing and what Nadugo Benga is doing, the Nigerian who has Arise TV, and others bringing new options to us, will be an exciting way that television news will continue. But I don't think it will continue to be the same news that I watched and the names that you mentioned brought us in the past.
Right. So we have a special, perhaps a particularly acute case of the general fragmentation of the news environment over the last 20 or 30 years. And none of you is really in a none of you is aspiring to the role that Huntley and Brinkley once had, or Walter Cronkite. There's different parts of it, but I'm curious how you respond to these challenges. Let's start with you, Hari, that while the News Hour is not a broad-based program in the way that the NBC Nightly News aspires to be, what does this new environment mean for the opportunities you have, the things you wouldn't like to change but you have to, and the opportunities you can pursue?
Well, I think, for example, as you mentioned a couple of nights ago in Texas, that was actually a huge missed opportunity by the networks, because it was the Texas Tribune that had the live stream of the events that were happening in Texas. So a huge amount of the Twitter conversation was actually informed by the primary source, which was none of the networks. Right? We don't have a satellite that can interrupt all PBS programming and give you that for 3 hours or 4 hours. You probably might not find that as interesting anyway. So I think that there was an opportunity there for someone else to pick up the ball and say, if the networks aren't going to do it, we will. So at this point, I don't perceive my competitors to be just the cable news networks or the broadcast networks. I perceive them to be anybody that has the capability to put video on the web and bring it to people in the way that's most relevant and convenient to them. So even though I work in a broadcast, and I'm happy to do so, I don't know anybody in my generation and peer group that shows up at night at 6 o'clock and has the time and the luxury to watch a television program like we've prepared. So I think for me, my challenge is to figure out, how do I create both a lean back and a lean forward, not in the MSNBC terms, but lean back and a lean forward experience where if you want, you can customize a playlist and choose your own ingredients and stack your own newscast. Or if you want, and if you trust me to sort of curate what happened in the world today, I can give you that as well. But I really think that my challenge is to figure out, how do I get it in your phone? How do I get you to DVR it? How do I get it so that it's easy for you to watch on your iPad wherever you are, whenever you are? Because I know that I'm going to lose that fight in competing with your time at 6 o'clock at night.
And just to follow up one point about that, you work for a non-commercial network, although it needs underwriters. Do you think is there any significant way in which you have an easier time than if you're working at ABC or NBC now?
We have less money, so I guess that's easier, right? Yeah. So, but I think that it's much more difficult sometimes for a very large institution to pivot very quickly. I was there at ABC in 2004 to 2007, and it was really Peter Jennings' thrust to try to get a digital channel on the air at that time, ABC News Now, where I kind of started. And it was his just sheer 800-pound guerrilla force that said, I want to do the conventions wall to wall, let's build a channel to make this happen, and let's keep it going. So that said, ABC has huge resources to publish online in a way that I can't at the moment. And it's just about whether they're capitalizing on that opportunity or not. I think that we're smaller, we're more agile, and I think that we can compete faster in the internet space than perhaps a large institution can. We just don't have the resources of, MSNBC has a fantastic website, and there's a lot of people that it takes to make that happen. So there's certain things that we can compete on and certain things that we can't.
I'm going to ask you now, Ehab al-Shihabi, you're opening up a new TV news network at a time where we're hearing that the landscape is stony in many ways. Why is this a good time to open up a network, and why do you think you can succeed or make a difference?
Sure. Number one, I just need to make sure that I'm opening Al Jazeera America. It's going to be American channel for the American audience. Now, I'm not opening a channel to be the normal channel because I strongly believe that the current model for the TV, for the linear programming compared to digital, is not sustainable. So I'm opening a channel for the 21st century. And let's talk a little bit from research perspective. We have conducted extensive research nationwide with a huge sample. And the research indicates that the root cause is not because people are moving to digital or moving to linear programming. The root cause, what people need, 50 million, roughly around 40 million of Americans, they want in-depth, informative journalism that matter most to them. That's really the root cause why people is going to Twitter and digital, because they are not getting what they want from the linear programming. They are not getting the depth, the informative, they are getting infotainment. So I just need to make sure the chain between the Twitter to have a breaking news, to go to digital to have a little bit more news, and then I would like to go for the TV to have detailed, informative factors. So number one is, I think if we follow the model of the 21st century, where let the TV, the linear programming, be in-depth, the reference for detailed information, fact-based, unbiased, a lot of people, the 50 million will say, we're gonna stick with the TV. That's number one. Number two, what the research indicated, that the new model, the new operating model in the news, on the linear programming and the TV, they want interactive. They need full conversion. They need a channel to be born with full conversion. It's not first I launch TV and then it's good to have digital and then it's good to have Twitter. No, they need to have fully integrated, converted, where they can go for breaking news and then they can go back for detailed, informative information. The other things where I just need to make sure, the new digital world will allow the American audience to be really interacting with the executive producers and producers before the launch of the program, during the planning stage. Because at the end, you need to have the demand of the audience, the need of the audience, and this is where the digital platform and the TV interact together at the planning stage. And then after that, when you have a program, you still have an interactive, a two-way communications between the audience and between the executive producers to be able to enrich the content of the TV. So you ask me in simple, why now? Research indicated there is a huge need for in-depth, informative, fact-based, unbiased. See what is the industry now. Opinionated news, breaking news, focusing more on celebrity and politicians. Where is the mainstream sitting on that? Where is the community information sitting on that? I now on the process of opening 12 bureaus during the launch. Why? I need original content from the community, from domestic news. There is a great news happening in Denver. There is a great news happening in Chattanooga. There is a great news happening in everywhere in the United States. Not just bad news, there is a great news that will motivate the American audience, as well as there is an issues that matter to the American audience. So that's number one. The research indicated only they want one-stop shop to be able to have news around the block and also to have news around the globe in an interconnected way that reflect the lifestyle and the issues and translate these issues to the American audience.
Thank you. So for this first round, I want to ask now, Larry O'Donnell, that you, for your general, you've just heard an argument that what the American public really wants and research shows is in-depth, serious news, which would suggest a return to sort of some of a golden age of American television. You've been involved very closely, and you're identified with a network whose success would seem to suggest not a moving away from in-depth reporting, but a particular political perspective, that part of NBC's success in the last couple of years has been responding to what Fox demonstrated. How do you think, what's the role of TV news. How do you respond to the idea that we really need more in-depth information and versus the fragmentation of the networks?
I think if you did a survey of the 300 million Americans, somewhere close to 50 million of them would tell you they would like to read the complete works of Shakespeare. They won't. If I put it on their desk in front of them every single page, they won't. And I, for one, am unimpressed by the research result that there's 50 million out there who want to watch something called in-depth TV news, because it's being offered to them all the time. It's being offered every night on PBS, on the NewsHour, every night. Those are serious and protracted conversations that do not require interruptions because they're so short. The time periods are so short. Charlie Rose does it every night. And every time you put on a PBS Frontline documentary, I can guarantee you that those 50 million people will find something else to do, because they always do. And if you could actually deliver 5 million of those people to a serious hour-long documentary, that's what NBC News would have done with the 30 Rock space and all the other spaces that they're struggling with now. I mean, NBC primetime is in big trouble. And the last time, cyclically, that they got in really big trouble was in the 90s. And their answer to that was to take Dateline, which was their version of 60 Minutes, which was one night a week, and they ended up putting it on 4 nights a week with Stone Phillips, who became the biggest TV star in America because he was on more than anybody else in the country. But so this 50 million they're uncorrallable. They are smart people with a lot of other interests. They will sneak out to the ballet or bowling or all sorts of other things when you are offering them this time-specific, in-depth news that they then won't watch. And so there's that. But, and oh, by the way, for Texas legislators, if you're going to do a filibuster that goes after 11 p.m. Eastern, I'm sorry. You don't get live for that.
But even on cable
They
news?
should, all their rules should be on these legislatures around the country. It should all be that the legislative day expires at 11 p.m. Eastern, no matter what time zone you're in, if you want to get that kind of wonderful stuff on. I mean, I'm the last live hour at 10 to 11, and I showed her for a couple of minutes. We cut into it and said, hey, she's doing this thing. This is interesting. Let's see how it goes. And then the next night, when people were actually watching again, and by the way, I think if we'd gone live to it, we would have gotten nothing. It would have just fallen right off a cliff. People go to sleep. I mean, that's the thing you have to remember. People do go to sleep in America, so they don't tend to watch Texas filibusters at midnight Eastern. But she was the big star of MSNBC and CNN, the next night at 8 p.m. when people really are watching. So she got her shot. And what MSNBC is, what I think cable news prime time has become in the shows that get the ratings is it's the op-ed page of the newspaper. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. And there's an awful lot of news in the newspaper, but everybody knows in the New York Times where to go to find out what Krugman thinks, to find out what Maureen Dowd thinks. Everybody knows what that is, and they know why it's on a different page, and they know why it's at the same place every day. Everybody gets that. And that's exactly what primetime cable is, certainly at Fox and MSNBC. And by the way, it's why that CNN doesn't have as good a business in primetime as Fox and MSNBC does. Because at that point, when you get to 9 o'clock at night in America, there's nobody who would ever find their way to cable news who doesn't already know every single thing that happened. And what they're doing with their remote is they're going, I want to see what O'Reilly thinks about this. I want to see what Rachel thinks about this. That's what they're doing. They're going to the op-ed piece. They know who Krugman is. They know the way he thinks about other things, but they want to find out what he thinks about this latest thing. And there's a new thing that happened today, and I don't yet know what Rachel thinks about it, so I'm going to turn it on at 9 o'clock and find out. In cable news and primetime, if you don't have a program that provokes the question, what does O'Reilly think, what does Hannity think, what does Rachel think, then that program will never, ever, ever, over time, get as big a rating as the programs that have both the provocation of that question and the answer to it. You know, you turn on Bill O'Reilly at 8 o'clock, you find out what he thinks.
So yes, Bob, yeah.
I want to make 2 points. First, there is a passionate and very big consumer audience that advertisers love for serious, in-depth coverage, and its name is 60 Minutes,
Yep.
which almost always rates in the top 10, entertainment or news. And there's CBS Sunday Morning, which I personally think is the best show on television. But I dare say a whole lot of you think so too. Second point I would make is, there is a hunger for serious, nonpartisan, in-depth coverage when this country is challenged in one way or another, for good or for bad. And it's why CNN often wins against its competitors when there's a Boston bombing or, God help us, 9/11 or whatever. So I think there is an audience for it, and I personally admire what Ehab's trying to do. I hope he succeeds. We'll see. But I don't know if it's 50 million or if it's 5 million, but 5 million is a pretty good rating.
Yes.
Can I just add? I mean, of course, he compared me with PBS. Let me just, we can go through analysis. We can go through the analysis of CNN and Fox and etc., which is, I'm not going to go through that comparison. But the reality is, let me give you a story of Haiti. Let's go through the American channel. And Haiti is tragedy. It's a human side of the story. And look of how many news channels, they did the breaking news, but how many news channels stay after the fact for 6 months? I will tell you something. If you look to what Al Jazeera did, and this is something not to promote, we won a fantastic award on this one. We stayed 6 to 8 months after the breaking news of Haiti. I will challenge you, will challenge everybody to tell me how many of these news channels stayed for 6 months to cover the human side of the story. It is a difference between covering breaking news and let people inform about there is a disaster happening in Haiti, versus to look to the angle of the human side of Haiti. Inform the government, inform the official, inform the politicians, inform the mainstream that there is a human crisis that needs support, that need help. There is people has to make key decisions about this one. This is what we are saying about the depth of the news, fact-based, real news, looking at the human angle of this story. Plus, in addition to that, don't miss how many of these news channels invest on the investigative journalism side. How are you going to get a true story? How are you going to get real story if you don't invest heavily on the channel of a 21st century with emphasis on the investigative journalism? It's not about celebrity. It's not about talent. The story, the talent, honestly, it is about the news itself.
And in fairness, I think you're not saying this is unimportant. You're saying there's not a giant audience for it.
I'm saying the American television viewer that has that remote and has access now to literally hundreds of channels has made hundreds of decisions every night to choose away from exactly this thing that everybody here wants them to choose. And it's available to them. I mean, what should never, ever be forgotten is just because you didn't see that in-depth thing that you want to see on the Today Show today, or on my show, PBS is doing it every night. NewsHour does it every night. And every discussion, I'm so glad NewsHour is here, because every discussion I've ever participated in this area, in this subject, always forgets that PBS exists, always forgets what NewsHour is doing. And what is also forgotten is how many people are freely choosing, not to watch NewsHour, to not do it. And so we're running the market test every single night. And the reason networks leave, at some point after the disaster, the sun sets on the disaster, is that the viewers go away. They will stay there. They would stay in Haiti for a couple of years if the viewers would keep watching it in the 13th or the 19th or the 47th day. So all they're doing, whenever you see commercials on television, whenever you're watching television and there's commercials, that determines what that television does, whether it's in the entertainment section, whether it's in the news section, the sports section, whatever it is. The commercials are driven by ratings. Ratings is a measurement of audience. The audience tells those channels with commercials what they want to watch. And the people running those channels go, okay, I get the message. We're leaving Haiti now. We're going back here.
If I were running Fox News, I would pay not to have those catheter ads all the time in terms of the image of who's what.
That has to do with the age demographic
Yes.
of who's watching the.
Yes, so we've heard a lot about PBS, yes.
So the check's in the mail, and but I think what he's saying is pretty important in the sense that there's a supply and demand and an economics at work, because we know basically what gets ratings and what's going to drive viewership. And I think for a non-commercial audience like ours, we have the luxury of time. We have the luxury to bring you a story about what the hell the violence was in Burma right now, why the Buddhist monks are actually taking violent actions against the Muslims there. Look it up, it's on our site. But it's really, I mean, that's not to say that I absolutely agree that I'm glad that Al Jazeera is making this investment. Frankly, them and CCTV are the only ones with deep enough pockets to have bureaus all over the planet right now. Right. When I worked at both the networks, primarily the bureaus were New York, LA, and then you'd have a guy like me standing in tornadoes in Texas, and maybe in Florida, and perhaps Atlanta, and then the world was covered by the London office, right? So that's it. And so here are these other networks wanting to have the Global South coverage when Hugo Chavez was pronounced dead. Al Jazeera was on my computer with a reporter there within 5 minutes because he lived there in Caracas, and I was impressed, right? So I'm happy that there's original content that's being created elsewhere, but really, I mean, when you start looking at on commercial television what's happening today, it's much more difficult to try to say to the viewer, really come to us, we're giving you this substantive conversation. I mean, there's a line that, I think it was the movie Gladiator, that said, the true power of Rome lies not in the marble floors of the Senate, but in the sands of the Colosseum, right? So right now, the Colosseum is extended into our living rooms, and the up and down arrow of whether this gladiator should live or die is happening with the remote control. There are more people watching the election of American Idol than they are of the president. Right? I mean, it's a tragedy that if as many of you watch the NewsHour as say you do, we would never have a funding crisis.
How many watch? In a typical NewsHour night, what is the audience?
Probably about 1 million.
Yeah. So how many people here I actually watch it, I record it on TiVo and watch it when doing exercise every night, because when we moved back from China, it was the only TV news worth watching. I found.
Right. And so now, we're on live stream during the day. We have a YouTube channel that actually gets far more international viewership than we ever imagined, because it's accessible and it's ready for people, it's embeddable, it's shareable, as our online video is, from overseas. And so there are people that literally say, I build a playlist and I watch your newscast and I'm in Japan because this is what I want. And so that's fantastic, I'm glad. But then I look at the American audience and I say, well, great. I mean, I'm producing this stuff, hopefully, for someone down the street. I mean, there was somebody that asked me the other day, like, are you getting recognized at Aspen? I said, I work at PBS. My anonymity is relatively safe, right? So I'm going to have a weekend broadcast, and I'm telling you that, again, I understand that 6 o'clock on Saturday night is going to be a tough sell for my friends, but I'm going to try to figure out, how do I get this content in front of those people that I want to be watching wherever and whenever they want it. And I won't sleep on TV. I don't think TV is dead. I don't think the internet's going to kill TV or anything like that. These are all sort of supplementary platforms. But I think we have a responsibility in this day and age to make sure that we spend 15 to 20% thinking about the distribution and the reach after the story is done, because we're competing with everything.
So I'm going to turn this back to you. Everybody's praising Al Jazeera for the coverage you do, but they're challenging your idea that there's going to be a really huge audience for it.
I mean, let me just a little bit make sure that we are going crazy with the rating. Am I right? This industry going crazy with the rating, which is I understand. But at the same time, we need to be very careful about what does the rating mean and the category of a news channel. There is a news channel. I mean, let me give you an example about Fox. Fox, they did a fantastic job on serving their audience. Their rating is excellent. They stick with the message. They know their audience. They serve them excellent. Their rating is very high. Now, let's put the category of the news channel. There is a news channel considered infotainment. Fantastic, they serve their audience. And there is a news channel called a real serious news channel, where it has audience, So I think the question is there a big audience for a serious news channel? The answer is yes. Is there is a threat by the digital for that TV channel? The answer is no, if you know how to do proper conversion and interaction with the audience. Going about the rating is a measurement about satisfaction. There is certain hours you will get a huge rating, and there is certain second you will get a low rating. So I don't think we need to go crazy about the rating. Rating is very important to generate advertising and generate, the other component. But I think we need to be very careful how we measure rating and how we rating consider viewership, but it doesn't include what's the audience need.
So I'd like to turn this in a different direction. Let's start with Bob Barnett. I think there are two different kinds of challenges for TV news, which we do well to separate. I think there's a business challenge for TV news that is just inevitably driven by, number one, the end of the time-specific viewing situation, where people can see things anytime, and the fragmentation of that broad audience. Those two things, that's just irreversible. And I assert there will be a solution to that business problem, because that's what businesses do. They'll find a way to have niche audiences, do whatever. There's a different sort of political problem and civic problem of TV news. The TV news still is the information sea in which democracy swims. And so the question is whether the solution to the first problem, the ways in which TV news will have to change to remain in business, whether it will make things better or worse on the second problem of giving us the information we need, will it make us stupider or sort of constant level of stupidity? My baseline assumption is American politics, American public knowledge has always been really bad. And it's bad now, and it's always been really bad. Do you have a conservation of public stupidity view, or do you think things are getting worse?
I guess about your first point, the cables are fortunate because they don't have to depend upon advertising. They have subscription fees.
Yeah.
So if you look at CNN internationally during the period of, say, Jim Walton's stewardship, profits up, ratings, a lot of articles about that. And they have been able to gain internationally. They've been able to get sufficient and good advertising. Most importantly, they've been able to get subscription fees. If ABC had cable, I think they'd be beating everybody because they have ESPN. So they have the bargaining power in the negotiation with the carriers that could get ABC cable, if there were one, an incredible business model. Now, to your second part. I think that the sea, as you call it rightly, of news attracts two different kinds of people. There are people who go to particularly cable news, but also broadcast news, for entertainment. They're going to watch, to a degree, Fox and Friends in the morning. There's a audience that goes, particularly to cable, for news and information, debate, and they're going to watch probably Morning Joe, or maybe the new Chris Cuomo show, we'll see. Or maybe the model that Charlie Rose and Gayle King have set up against the old model of ABC and NBC on CBS. So I think the business problem will always be easier for cable. I agree with you that entrepreneurs who run these things will find a way to keep it going. But ultimately, for people like these people here who put on programming, they're going to need to find, first, are they entertaining or are they informing? Second, what are they doing within each of those niches to get sufficient viewers to sustain, beyond subscription, their economic model?
I mean, there's a couple of cost challenges that I don't know if most of the folks in the audience think about, but for a field piece, meaning where myself and a producer and perhaps a cameraman and audio person go out and create a 3-minute or a 6-minute story, it probably costs somewhere around $5,000 for any network to do. Now, so there's 5 minutes, about $5,000. Now, I could have 2 interconnected satellites and have 2 people talking at each other for about $300 to $400 for 15 minutes. So think about how much it costs to go do substantive field reporting versus how cheap it is to have kind of conversations, whether they're battles or not, on air. right? And then you think about the live TV value proposition. So now you're going to have this massive flock, and there's already stories about how many satellite trucks are outside Mandela's hospital today, bringing you almost the identical same picture, by the way, right? When we had the miners that were trapped, there was only one camera in the ground. It was the government camera, but there was a fleet of 50 to 60 cameras outside to show you what. But live television today, to me, there's only 3 reasons to be live on TV right now. So one is sports, and ESPN has monetized that. You want to watch Game 6 and the way that it ended in real time. Another is perhaps a shared national event. Everybody is thinking about the election or whatever, Survivor, Dancing with the Stars, etc. Unfortunately, those are the main national events today, right? And then third would be if there's a tsunami coming and you have a camera on this beach. That kind of gripping, or this guy that just walked across the Grand Canyon for God knows what reason to have his kids watch him fall. I mean, it was just, anyway, but I was watching, right? I was glued, so you were too. So, and you weren't watching the NewsHour then, so believe me. So those are reasons to be live. Everything else can be time shifted. So why are the economics in such a way where we're spending this kind of money getting you the same shot? I mean, the NewsHour doesn't have that money, so we have to be a little bit smarter and say, okay, we're going to take a feed from Reuters or from ITN or from ABC. We have partnerships with those. We'll give you the scene outside of Mandela's hospital without having to go there and spend that kind of money to do it. I mean, there are going to be some networks that have those pockets, but we're just going to try to spend our money to save it and say, we're going to bring you this story out of Burma or out of Jordan or Syria, right? And so these are kind of decisions that networks and publicly traded companies as well as private organizations have to make on a daily basis, and it's not something most viewers really think about.
Jim, I think one of the solutions to the economics of the challenges of this business will be the concept that's existed at the White House for 25 years, and that's pooling.
Sure.
They do that routinely on major trips or press conferences where there isn't a big room or whatever. And I think CBS and CNN kind of snuck up on doing it some years ago, didn't work out. But I think ultimately there will be, between and among all these operations, cable and broadcast, opportunities to dramatically cut costs by doing the Mandela thing all together, the shot, and then of course have their own people talking about what's going on, but they can be in New York. And I think millions and millions of dollars could and will be saved in this business by that concept, which has actually existed for a long time.
And let me ask you, Ehab, about that. I'm going to ask you about politics in a second, but so are you, part of your commitment is to have these live crews around the world to do the sort of reporting that is not feasible for U.S. networks anymore?
Sure. I'm going to answer this, but I'm just going to put the context on this one. From economic perspective, in general, and everybody understands from economic perspective, in general, a news channel doesn't make money.
Right.
Okay, this is why independent channel usually doesn't survive. So this is why you see most of these networks create entertainment, create sport, create documentaries, because this is where you will generate the cash. And you need to be very careful when you start building economics to jeopardize the quality of journalism, because journalism has a quality, need to be maintained. Am I right? This is why you see some organization or network, they open sport channel first, and then they open news channel, because you need to maintain the quality of journalism. This is what we did. We opened sport channel, beIN Sport, and now we decided to open Al Jazeera America. So that's number one. I need to make sure the standard of journalism, the quality of journalism should not be touched by maximizing shareholder values on the account of the quality of journalism. Now, regarding efficiency and the operating model, I think we have done it many times, repeatedly. I think there is an efficient model where you can use, you don't have to open bureaus, fancy bureaus with a fancy building. I think when we define bureau, it's about 3 elements. It's about correspondent, producers, and the cameraman. And you know what? If you invest less on your building and invest more in your correspondent, you will see a huge difference in the operating model of the news. You will see the quality of journalism much higher. We're not talking about camera, fancy camera. I mean, currently you will see a lot of people, a lot of organizations talk about citizen journalism. I don't want to reach that level because we still believe professionalism and the quality of journalism is important. But there is a lot of now in the digital world, and before I used, when we say 15 years ago, the camera cost was huge. Now you can find operating model of a camera where you can, in $1,000 can get you a huge quality on this. So I think efficiency is a critical, understanding the investment to be on your staff, on the quality of journalism, and less on overhead and cost and advertisings and celebrities and etc.
I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to make one policy point myself, following on Ehab's initial point, which is it's important to understand that what we think of as serious journalism, international coverage, state house coverage, investigative coverage, has never been a viable business on its own. It's always had to attach itself to some host body, whether it's the Los Angeles Times, the olden days, it was 500 pages thick with travel sections, or the Lost Leader for the old network news operation. So we're in a moment of transitioning to a new host body. But with serious news like higher education, if it's forced to operate in a sort of standalone profit basis, it's in a lot of trouble. I wanted to ask you two political, cultural questions. One, again, is this political sea issue. Do you think the sea of information, you've worked in politics, you've created an imaginative world of politics, you now are involved in political commentary, is it any worse than it was in the golden age a generation or two ago, or is it merely different?
I think the golden age of this thing was around 1990. It's when politics and politicians had matured to the point where, especially with all of America's ugliest and most difficult governing battles behind it, like segregation, that sort of thing, it had matured to a point where there was an understanding in that about how we could govern, and that Bob Dole, leading Republicans in the Senate, knew how and when to talk to certain Democrats to, for example, as he did, keep Social Security alive. It was in grave danger in the 1980s. And he knew there was a moment we're going to have to do this. We can't let this thing collapse. And so if at that time cable news existed the way it does now, with every politician's action being reviewed that night in depth by both sides, and Twitter and all of these other information sources, those Bob Doles and Bill Bradleys would have been unable to have meetings together, and so that's the biggest effect of this, and it's very hard to tell, which came first, but as of now, if there came a moment on some particular piece of legislation that Ted Cruz decided he could step out of this box he's put himself in and very quietly help out to get this thing done that was good for Florida, he basically can't do that now because he'll get caught on Twitter and on this, and he'll get boxed in, and so it becomes the echo chamber, which includes Limbaugh and talk radio and all of this stuff, has created real inhibiting forces on politicians who would otherwise be making deals with each other here and there.
And if you're writing a West Wing episode set right now, would there be a different aspect for the media politico interaction?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wrote the first West Wing that referred to in any real way the existence of the internet when I used Drudge. In the
when
teaser.
You used Drudge as opposed to using drugs.
Yeah. And this was at a time, when the Drudge Report was the biggest thing in political online sourcing, and there was, and I think somewhere in the first page or two of the script, the urgency was, hey, Drudge, did you see that thing on Drudge? Which in those days was, at 9 a.m., the first thing people were saying to each other in political campaigns and in political offices, like all the time, and in the media, by the way. And there was an interesting thing about it. Everybody who wasn't in Drudge's part of the world, which is kind of the right and republicanism, would publicly criticize Drudge as being trash, junky stuff. But the truth of it is that everybody on the liberal side of the media, the liberal side of politics, everybody in politics believed everything they read in Drudge until it was somehow proven untrue. And the fun thing about it, by the way, in the West Wing episode was that the item that Drudge had at the beginning of the episode that everybody hated, of course, turned out to be true. But yeah, that was the deepest we got with it then. I mean, now, doing it now, you'd absolutely have to have a lot of that flying around, a lot of it.
Jim, you and I first worked together, I think, in the '76 Carter-Mondale campaign. And I just recently worked in the 2012 Romney-Obama campaign, which shows how old I am. And back in '76, we were all in that horrendous hotel in Atlanta running that campaign. What did we care? What did the anchors on the evening news? Now, what did we care in 12? What did Mike Allen put in Politico Playbook? What did they discuss on Morning Joe? What's hot on Twitter? What was on BuzzFeed? You know, that it's a different world. That politics informed by and influenced by the media has changed totally from '76 to 12, just to pick a couple of days.
Yeah, Hari, go ahead.
You don't want to know where I was during that campaign. But I think, you know, the conversation that's happening outside of DC is reflected back in much, much faster today. So perhaps people had these same discontents a generation ago or 2 generations ago, but now I think politicians are paralyzed by it into some levels of inaction because they see the special interests that might penalize them in the next round of election actively campaigning against them in almost real time, which maybe didn't happen. You know, you could have, and same with politicians who might reach across the aisle and all of a sudden there's an Instagram of them shaking hands with someone they should never be in the same room with. That has consequences for them. So, I mean, there were the good and bad of having this kind of real-time dialogue with your viewers or your constituents.
I'm going to turn to questions in just a moment, but I just want to be clear on this. Are we saying that it's coincidental that we have these new means of communication when our national government seems to be at a historic low in functionality, or do we think there's a causal relationship?
Oh, I think there's this interactive relationship. It's very hard to say, you know, which provoked which, but I think it's an absolutely necessary component, that new electronic connectivity, that whole, recently, as we saw spring up, world of the Tea Party. They could communicate, you know, that this Tea Party chapter in Idaho could talk to a Tea Party chapter in Mississippi in a way that was absolutely impossible a short time ago.
Yeah. Who has a question? There are roving microphones over here, so please wait for the microphone to come to you. It will come to you, and when it arrives, please give your name and ask your question. And there are 3 microphones, so if somebody else raises a hand, we can go there next.
Hi, I'm Connor Friedersdorf of The Atlantic, and when I think about Fox News and how it positioned itself in the market, it of course was partly ideological, but also brought a very different cultural perspective and just kind of different assumptions embedded into the way that people see the world. And I wonder, as Al Jazeera thinks about coming into the American market, does it think of that as an advantage, giving the American consumer that maybe wants to see how the rest of the world sees us? That's something I hear from people who want Al Jazeera on their cable news. You know, it seems like there's a risk and an opportunity there. On one hand, you can't be so different in your cultural sensibility that you alienate American viewers, but you want to be different enough that you are a different choice than CNN, than MSNBC, even than PBS, which, despite all their differences, have this similarity in their relationship to the American establishment. And so I wonder what your thoughts about that are.
Sure. For Al Jazeera, when we came to Al Jazeera America, I just need to make sure to define Al Jazeera America. Al Jazeera America, it's American channel, run by American board, run by advisory board, American advisory board, and all its staff, it's roughly around 850 staff, American staff. So it's really American channel for American audience. Now, Al Jazeera in general in America is not coming new to the market. We've been in the market since 2006 through Al Jazeera English. The opportunity came when we monitored, we were live streaming. Al Jazeera English was live streaming and doing original programming, original content. What we noticed is 40% of the live streaming came from the US. So that was an eye-opener, that's number one. Number two, during that, Al Jazeera has intensive research center. So we were doing a research for the past 9 months because also we need to understand the change in the demographic in America. I've been living in America for 22 years. We need to understand, you know, the landscape of the industry. There was a huge evidence from a research perspective, from a focus group perspective, and a gap exists, and the opportunity was very clear that there is an opportunity in the market for serious journalism. If you look, it's part of our strategy to expand. We have done it in Al-Balkan. We are opening in France. We are about to open in Turkey. So the opportunity exists and the demand exists, and it's been proven by Al Jazeera English, who's been live streaming for the past 5 years. And last year itself, we won serious award, almost 12 serious awards, one of them for our coverage of Haiti. If that indicates something, that indicates the demand and the reputation that exists. Number two, and the final point here that I would like to highlight, the time we advertise for 800 positions, we receive roughly around 21 to 26,000 applicants. And every time we do an interviews, I look them in the eyes and we see the full respect for the standard of journalism that Al Jazeera is providing. And that's indicates something for me, that the American audience, they are not stupid. They know what they need. And really they are informed and they are hungry for information like this.
It's interesting, too, to think that probably now the NSA knows who's those 40% of Americans watching live stream. That is interesting. So I think there's a question over here and then one in the far back. Yes.
Hi, my name is Farai Chidea. There's been a lot of talk of live streaming and of PBS's web presence, but from what I understand, there's not a revenue model, anything matching the broadcast model for digital media. So, you know, obviously Al Jazeera is expanding into the domestic carriage market, but in general, the trends are pointing to millennials basically dropping cable coverage, watching everything online. What's the revenue model for the future of news?
Sure. Again, I mean, for Al Jazeera America, we came here, I think, around October timeframe, and that's based on a lot of discussion and research. And we decided to put a smart investment based on a business model. And the business model will generate a sustainable revenue, because the fact is, what we believe is, we believe the first 2 years, or the first maybe a couple of years, it will be a little bit tough. But we believe that the revenue generation will happen. We're going to break even in X number of years. And then you're going to see, I mean, everybody who tasted our product in Al Jazeera English, they become loyalists. And I think what we are betting here, we are betting on the experience that we have. It's not just based on a paper research, it's based on an evidence and experience we have in Al Jazeera English. And I think we are opening a business model that will be profitable. But the only difference here is, there is a difference between other organizations who their intention is maximizing the profit for the shareholder value versus maintain the standard and the quality of journalism and at the same time make enough profit. For example, I will tell you why we are not maximizing the profit. We decided consciously that we decided what we need to have 8 minutes of advertising. We do not want to have 18 minutes of advertising like other, cable channel. The reason why, because the consumer, the audience, they demanded less advertising minutes per hour.
Well, I mean,
yes.
I mean, our digital audience grew from last year to this year. If you look at January to May, from 1 million uniques to 7 million uniques. I mean, that's just not the kind of growth that we're getting in the television space. That said, I think there are some smart underwriters out there and some that understand that this is a completely different market of people that you're targeting, and they're actually far more lucrative for these advertisers or underwriters to get in front of. And I mean, I think there's some conversations now with a couple, but there are a few that are coming in and saying, you know what, that's great that you have a television program, but I want to be associated with this digital product, which has this kind of growth, which has this kind of, time on site, time on phone, et cetera, that's where I want to get to them. So, I mean, I think that when Madison Avenue changes, where they convince whoever, Pfizer or whatever company, to take the budget and they say, okay, let's give $6 million to the evening news broadcast and $1 million to the online, and when that needle starts to move, then I think that there will be a far more. I don't think that it's unprofitable. I think it's unprofitable because of the way that the system is right now.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a sustainable model for online alone right now. I hate to say it. I think it has to be appended to a mothership, whether it's cable or broadcast. That said, Washington Post has started TV with Chris Cillizza and others. Politico has started TV with John Harrison, Mike Allen, and others. So there's a synergism that exists. I think maybe one of the most exciting things that's going on is what ABC is doing with Univision. My understanding of it, called Fusion, is that they're trying to reach Latino population that doesn't want to listen in Spanish but wants information and news that's geared to them but in English. So that, I think that'll have a big online component too. So people are playing with it, but I'm not optimistic that there can be an online only that sustains.
So we just have a couple minutes here. I'm going to ask if microphones can call on 2 or 3 people. We'll get a couple questions back to back, and then we'll see how much time we have to answer them. So microphones go. Yes, yes, sir. Yeah.
Yes, this question is addressed to Mr. O'Donnell and any others on the panel. I'm wondering, as a prognosticator, where you see the 3 channels, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, 10 years from now. Do you see any of them or all of them being here in 10 years? Do you see any of them falling by the wayside?
Okay, there's one question. Let's just get one other answer. Actually, yes, next, and yeah, go ahead, yes.
I get most of my news on radio, and including PBS, and then every once in a while I will, I'll say, oh, I wonder what that looks like. I'll see if I can see it on TV or on my computer. And I'm just wondering how common that is.
The radio, online, and yes, and the far back for our last question, yes.
This question is for Mr. Al Jazeera.
Yes.
Al Jazeera, Al Shihabi, Al Pacino.
Yes.
Fantastic. It's all the same. Go ahead.
You know, we in America now, it's the most important period of our lives, speaking as a black lesbian from South Africa. And I'm wondering, how are you going to deal with the queer content? A content that deal with LGBTI individuals who are part and parcel of the American dream that you have. And how can the stories, the true stories of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are going to be articulated on your American dream? Thank you.
Okay, in the next 2 minutes, we have future of the 3 cable news operations. We have the radio to online conversion. We have LGBT and other themes.
Can I give a one-sentence
Yes.
answer to the first question? It all depends who succeeds Roger Ailes and Phil Griffin.
You belong to one of these. What do you say?
Fox is a hugely successful business. I mean, hugely. The NewsHour gets 1 million viewers a night. Bill O'Reilly gets over 3 million every night. Sean Hannity gets 2.5 million every night. It makes hundreds of millions of dollars. It's going to take a lot longer than 10 years for that thing to somehow go belly up. I don't see why it would. MSNBC is a hugely profitable business, and it's got many years in front of it. It'll last a lot longer than I last at the network, that's for sure. CNN loses in prime time, year in and year out to those 2 networks. But as Bob points out, there's other ways to make money. I don't know how long they can continue to shuffle that, but they have such bigger interests than Fox and MSNBC has, and more far-flung interests that their primetime business is less important to them overall. But I don't know enough about the business. Bob knows that stuff. I really don't know how that works.
Just a quick answer to the first question. YouTube wasn't around 10 years ago, and I don't know what's going to be around 10 years from now that will have radical consequences on what we do for a living. 2, the radio conversion, we have a huge NPR following that actually listens to us as they drive home. Yeah. And we're incredibly thankful for that. And that's, I think, a great opportunity for public media to kind of come together on this. And I would say that what you're doing is very similar to what a lot of people are doing. And this all kind of, for me, says that the definition of television is shifting into back that of sort of an appliance. It's just a bigger screen for you to consume information on now. So I don't think you're going to have the same relationship and the same definition of what television was when Walter Cronkite was on versus what it might be 10 years from now.
Sorry, can I comment very quickly? I mean, just to answer your questions about 10 years, are they going to survive or not? I just need to remind, demographic is changing. If you link the demographic to Fox, demographic to MSNBC, demographic to CNN, you need to be aware of demographic are changing. Who's the audience for Fox? What is the new generation coming to see? I think, I'm not going to bet, are they going to survive or not? I hope they will survive. But remember, demographic are very quickly changing, and their demand and what excites them, it's completely different.
And do you have any questions, answer to the specific Mr. Al Jazeera question?
Okay, Mr. Al Jazeera, I think just to make sure I understand the question, is it how we are covering
Yes, just
Nelson Mandela?
30 seconds on that.
See, Al Jazeera America will cover the America, and also it has a coverage for the internationals. Our concept here is the interconnect between what's happened in the domestic and what's happened, and how we can interconnect between domestic and international news so we can elevate and we can reflect on the American life. Regarding the Nelson Mandela, absolutely we're going to cover it in Al Jazeera America, but remember,
LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual.
Yeah.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
sorry, what's the,
It's the lesbian, bisexual, gay.
How we gonna
issues.
cover it?
Yes. Mhm.
we're going to cover it as a normal, standard story, and we're going to see how this coverage, how this story will impact the American life. What is the impact on the American? Who is supporter, who is not supporter? And we're going to have an open platform for discussion, fact-based, unbiased, in-depth.
Could hardly be a better answer than that. We have many more issues on the table, but we're out of time. Please join me in thanking our panelists.